Athens versus Sparta, 431 BC, the year Greece split its own heart. Summer heat hangs over Attica, dust trembles along the roads. A watchman on the long walls tastes salt from the Saronic Gulf and ash from farms already stripped bare. Behind the walls, a city crowds itself merchants, mothers, boys who have not yet learned to be afraid. Beyond the horizon, bronze moves like a storm, Spartan spears, slow and patient, the way mountains walk. Two worlds are about to collide, one born of open sea and daring ideas, the other carved from iron habits and a vow never to kneel. Here is your first truth. Within 2 years, the man guiding Athens, Pericles, will be carried out by a plague that devours the city it meant to save, not to frighten you, to show you the cost that was already waiting at the gate. Now a smaller truth, quieter and sharper. At dusk, a runner reaches the Dippolon gate with a sealed message. If it is opened, a promise breaks. If it is carried on, a friend dies. The guard's hand hesitates. Torches whisper. The city holds its breath. He chooses. We do not yet know how. The long walls and the first embers. The message was never meant to be read under torchlight. Its wax seal bore the owl of Athens' eyes wide, unblinking, and a thin crimson line across its edge, a sign known only to generals and spies. The runner's hand trembled as he passed through the Dippolon gate. Behind him, the countryside burned in slow waves. Farmers' homes, once white under the sun, now glowed red against the night like dying hearts. Inside the walls, the air felt wrong. Too many bodies, too little wind. The hum of the city had changed. Less chatter, more breath held. Mothers pressed wet cloths against their children's mouths to block the smoke. Soldiers tried to look calm, but even their armor felt heavier. The sound of hammering nails, repairs, barricades echoed through the narrow streets. Pericles stood on the balcony of the Nix, staring at the dark horizon. The fires were close enough to paint his face in flickers. Around him, his advisors murmured of retreat, counterattack, surrender, anything but stillness. But Pericles knew stillness was strategy. He had built the long walls for this, stone veins running from city to sea, lifelines of trade and safety. Let Sparta burn the earth, he said quietly. They cannot burn the sea. Yet the runner waited below, clutching his secret. His sandals were soaked with sweat and ash, his throat raw from the journey. He had been sent from Plataea, where the Spartan advance had begun. The letter in his hand, sealed and waiting, carried news that could change Athens' course or destroy what trust remained between its allies. He hesitated again. Duty meant delivering it directly to Pericles. But he knew what the message contained. A warning from a friend of the general, a man who had chosen Sparta. If revealed, it would mark one of them a traitor. If hidden, it might cost the city a defense it desperately needed. He looked at the seal one last time. Then he made his choice, not to open it, not to deliver it, but to hide it beneath a stone near the wall's base. A coward's decision, perhaps, or the only human one left. Up by dawn, the Spartan army was gone. They did not fight battles like Athens did. They left reminders instead. Charred fields, gutted homes, livestock slaughtered and left to rot. They had come not to conquer, but to humiliate, to remind the proud city that no wall could hide its shame. The Athenians gathered atop the walls to watch smoke rise over their land. Some cursed the Spartans, others cursed Pericles. But Pericles himself said nothing. He only watched the horizon, where the enemy's campfires still glowed faintly, and whispered to no one, "They have burned our fields, but not our will." That night Athens' fleet prepared to sail. The order came suddenly, swift, precise. 300 triremes creaked in the harbor, oars ready, crews whispering prayers to Poseidon. If Sparta ruled the land, Athens would rule the sea. This was how the war would be fought, fire for fire, but on different elements. That the runner, now sleepless, stood among the crowd. He had tried to forget the stone, the hidden letter, but its weight pressed against his mind like an unanswered debt. When the ships departed at sunrise, drums thundering in rhythm with the oars, he watched the sea swallow them. Among them was a vessel carrying Pericles' cousin, Cleon, a man known for ambition sharper than any blade. The city roared with pride as the sails disappeared into the mist. But deep beneath the noise, in the cracks of the wall, a secret waited. The seal still unbroken, the truth still silent. Days turned into weeks. The fleet returned with spoils, gold, grain, slaves, and stories of victory. But victory had a strange sound now. Hollow, echoing. Rumors spread of Spartan retaliation, of allies turning uncertain, of gods turning silent. And then came a whisper through the crowd. Plataea had fallen. The news struck like an arrow. Plataea, the small city that had once stood beside Athens against Persia, was gone, its defenders executed, its name erased. The Athenians spoke of vengeance. But Pericles remained measured. Emotion wins applause, he said to his council, but reason wins wars. His voice was calm, but his eyes had grown old. One night, as the moon slid behind the Acropolis, the runner returned to the wall. The stone was gone. In its place, only a faint mark in the dust. Someone had found it. Someone knew. He searched the shadows, heart pounding. A figure stepped forward, a woman, cloaked, her voice quiet as falling ash. "You were trusted," she said, "and yet you doubted." She held up the seal, broken noun, let the parchment fall between them. "The Spartans knew our movements before we did. Someone inside Athens speaks for them." Before he could answer, a horn sounded from the harbor. A single blast, urgent, wrong. The woman turned toward the sound. "It begins again," she whispered. They ran. Down the hill, past sleeping homes, toward the port. The smell hit first hard. Fire, oil. The sea burned. Ships that had returned in triumph now blazed like floating pyres. Men shouted names that vanished into the smoke. The triremes groaned, one by one, as masts fell into the water with a hiss. In the chaos, the runner saw Cleon. His armor was gleaming, even in the firelight. His face calm, almost pleased. "Sparta strikes by land," Cleon said, voice low. "But the real war is here inside our walls." The runner tried to speak, to ask about the letter, but Cleon turned away before he could form the words. By dawn, the harbor was a graveyard of ships. Athens would rebuild. Of course it always did. But something had changed. The city's pride had cracked, invisible but spreading. Fear moved through the streets, quiet and polite at first. Like a guest, no one dared to name. Above the ruins, Pericles addressed the people. His voice, steady and resonant, cut through the smoke. "We are not defeated," he said. "We are tested. Sparta believes they can scorch our courage as they scorch our fields. Let us prove them wrong. Let the ashes feed the flame." The crowd roared, but not all believed. The runner, standing at the edge, saw Cleon's cold smile and the woman's vanished cloak. He understood then that the message had done its work not by being read, but by being lost. That night, as the city rebuilt its ships, the wind carried strange sounds along the long walls, echoes like whispers, like footsteps, like the breath of 1,000 unseen watchers. End somewhere beyond the sea. Sparta was already moving again. The runner knew sleep would not come. He closed his eyes, saw the seal, the fire, the choice he made, and wondered, had the war truly begun with Sparta's march, or with his hesitation at the gate? The sea murmured no answer, only the distant hum of oars approaching, unseen. Fire outside, fever within. Rain never came that summer. Clouds gathered often above Athens, swollen and grey, but each time the wind drove them back toward the sea. The air was heavy with smoke and the faint stench of burned grain. What the Spartans had not destroyed, the sun finished slowly. Behind the long walls, Athens pulsed with restless life. Refugees filled every street, cattle were penned between temples, and children played among broken wagons. The great city, proud and ordered, had become a single crowded heart beating too fast. Every breath tasted of closeness, sweat, salt, fear. Pericles still walked among his people, not as a king, but as a man trying to be more than mortal. He spoke quietly, moving from market to shipyard, his presence like a steady flame. And "Our strength," he told them, "is not in what we have lost, but in what we refuse to surrender." Yet even as he spoke, his voice carried fatigue, a shadow the people chose not to see. At night, he stood on the Acropolis and looked toward the harbor. The fires had been quenched, the ships rebuilt, the fleet once again glimmered beneath the moon. Yet beneath the surface, something unseen had begun, a sickness without a name. It started in the docks, among sailors who had returned from the islands. A cough, a fever, eyes red with salt and pain. Within days, the alleys whispered of it. Within weeks, the whispers became prayers. The runner was one of the first to notice. He had been helping to rebuild a section of the wall when he saw two men collapse near the gate. One gasped like a drowning swimmer. The other simply fell silent. The physicians said it was exhaustion. But that night, the runner saw the same mark on another, black around the lips, heat radiating from the skin like a forge. He tried to find the woman again, the one who had known about the letter. She had vanished after the harbor burned. Some said she was a priestess, others a spy, but her warning echoed now in every fevered breath. Someone inside Athens speaks for Sparta. As the illness spread, fear replaced reason. Families locked themselves inside. Priests blamed the gods. Generals blamed the sea. Even the air seemed heavier, thick with the scent of decay. The runner saw men once proud beg for water, only to die with hands still outstretched. The city that had once dreamed of empire now dreamed only of survival. Pericles summoned the assembly. The crowd filled the Pnyx under a cruel sun. Some shouted for retreat, others for vengeance. Pericles raised his hand, and silence fell not out of respect. But exhaustion, you see, ruin, he said, and you think we are finished. But our enemy stands beyond our walls. They wait for us to break ourselves. Will you help them? From the crowd, Cleon's voice cut through the murmurs. The people deserve truth, not hope, he said. Sparta does not need to wait. The gods themselves turn from us. What kind of leader hides behind sickness and speeches? The crowd stirred. Pericles met Cleon's gaze. Better a man who guards his city, he said, than one who would sell it to save himself. The assembly erupted, half cheering, half roaring in anger. When it ended, there was no victory in Pericles' face. He had won the moment, but lost the room. That night, thunder rolled over the city, though no rain followed. The runner wandered the lower wards, searching for order among chaos. Fires burned to cleanse the air. Prayers rose with the smoke. At the temple steps, he found a child sitting alone, her eyes glazed. When he touched her shoulder, she whispered, "They say it started from the ships that came from Egypt." Her voice trembled. "But the men on those ships, they said it started here." He froze. The words made no sense, and yet they did. The sickness was not an enemy's weapon. It was the city itself consuming what it had built. Days later, the runner was summoned to the Acropolis. Pericles had fallen ill. The leader who had carried Athens through war now lay in fever, whispering names of ships that would never sail again. Around him, physicians argued, burned herbs, and begged the gods for mercy. The runner waited at the door, uncertain why he had been called. When Pericles opened his eyes, they were clouded but steady. "You were the messenger," he said, voice weak. "You carried the seal and chose not to deliver it." The runner could not speak. "I know," Pericles said. "I would have done the same." He paused, a faint smile forming. "There are moments when loyalty demands silence more than action." He coughed, the sound dry and final. "Find the woman," he whispered. "She knows what I could not stop." The runner bowed his head. By the next morning, Pericles was gone. Athens mourned in noise bells, drums, lamentations echoing between the temples. Yet beneath the grief ran another sound, the low rhythm of Cleon's voice rising in the assembly. He promised strength, punishment, and glory. The people, desperate for certainty, began to listen. The runner searched for the woman for 3 days. He found her at last near the ruins of the port, her cloak torn, her eyes hollow. "It's not Sparta," she said before he could ask. "It's us." The letter spoke of our allies in the islands, turning away. "They think the gods favor the Peloponnesians now." He stared at her. "You knew this would happen." "I knew something would." She looked toward the sea. "You can't build walls high enough to keep out what grows inside." A bell rang across the harbor, long, heavy, urgent. The runner turned. A new fleet was gathering. Cleon's banner flew above it, crimson against the pale sky. Athens was not retreating. It was preparing to strike. Where? The runner asked. The woman's answer was almost a whisper. To make an example, the words struck harder than thunder. Mytilene was no enemy. It was a city once allied with Athens, now merely uncertain. Cleon meant to crush doubt with fear. As the fleet sailed, the people cheered. Victory had become their only cure. The runner watched from the shore, his pulse slow, cold. He could feel something shifting, not in Sparta's favor, nor Athens, but against both. When night fell, he returned to the place where he had once hidden the letter. The stone was still gone, but beneath it, something new, a piece of parchment, folded and sealed with the same crimson mark. His hands shook as he lifted it. This time, the seal was already broken. The message inside was brief, written in a familiar hand. "You cannot save Athens from itself, but you might survive what comes next." He looked toward the harbor, where Cleon's ships were fading into darkness. Behind him, the city coughed and burned. Ahead, the sea whispered the same promise it always did: beauty and betrayal. Side by side. He did not know which would reach him first. Wolves of the sea, shields of the land. The Aegean was a mirror that morning, calm, deceptive, waiting. Cleon's fleet sliced through it like a blade through silk. The triremes rode in unison, 300 wooden hearts beating the rhythm of empire. Oars rose and fell, carving silver scars into the water. From the decks came the faint sound of flutes, meant to steady the rower's breath, but it only deepened the unease that followed them across the sea. The runner had been conscripted again, this time as a messenger aboard one of the lead ships. His hands were still bandaged from carrying the plague-stricken weeks before, but his orders were simple: deliver dispatches, observe, survive. Cleon wanted every word of the campaign recorded, a triumph written before it began. As the fleet neared Mytilene, the island came into view, its cliffs rising like dark sentinels above the blue. Villages dotted the slopes, quiet, undefended. The people there were Greeks, not Persians or barbarians, brothers by language, faith, and blood. Yet Cleon's face showed no hesitation. He stood at the prow, eyes fixed on the shore, lips moving silently, counting perhaps, or praying to a god who had grown tired of choosing sides. When the order came, it was swift. No warning, no mercy. The first waves of soldiers leaped into the shallows, shields high, blades drawn. The islanders, startled, fled toward the hills. The city gates closed before the attackers reached them, and soon Mytilene's banners, once bearing the owl of Athens, were torn down. Smoke rose again over the sea. The war, reborn in fire. By nightfall the runner stood among the ruins of the outer fields. He watched a family's home burn, the father dead, the mother silent, the child staring into flames without a sound. He thought of Athens and how its people once spoke of justice and reason. Now justice meant obedience, and reason meant silence. Cleon rode past on horseback, his armor reflecting the firelight. "We will send a message," he said to the men gathered around him. "Let all Greece remember betrayal earns only one reward." The soldiers cheered, but their voices faltered halfway, as if even they were uncertain what victory meant anymore. The next morning, the runner was called to Cleon's tent. Maps were spread across the table, the ink still wet from recent markings. "You are close to Pericles," Cleon said without looking up. "You carried his letters." The runner nodded slowly. "Then you'll understand what I'm asking." Cleon's voice was calm, too calm. "You will return to Athens with the news. Tell them Mytilene will be punished, every man executed, every woman and child sold. The assembly must approve before the sentence is carried out." The runner hesitated. "And if they refuse?" Cleon finally met his eyes. "Then remind them what happens when mercy weakens resolve." He left before the runner could answer. By the time the messenger ship reached Athens, the city had changed again. The plague had receded, leaving behind empty homes and quiet streets. But the fear remained, hidden beneath the routines of rebuilding. When the runner entered the assembly with Cleon's decree, the crowd erupted. Some shouted for justice, others for compassion. Then, rising from the back, came another voice, calm, reasoned, and familiar. It belonged to Diodotus, one of the few who had stood beside Pericles. "If we kill them all," he said, "we teach our allies that Athens rewards loyalty with terror. If we show mercy, we show strength nor weakness." Cleon's supporters roared in protest. "Mercy is what loses wars." The debate lasted all day. When night fell, the torches burned low, and the assembly voted. By a narrow margin, they chose death. The decree was sealed, the ships prepared. Mytilene's fate was set. But something strange happened the next morning. A silence spread through the city, like a shadow moving over light. Men who had cheered the night before now whispered among themselves. Mothers wept openly in the streets. The cruelty of the sentence had sunk in. Athens had not won, it had changed. Before dawn, a second vote was called. This time, the margin reversed. The city would send another ship, one that would race the first, carrying orders to spare the people of Mytilene. 2 ships, 2 fates, chasing each other across the same sea. The runner was chosen again. He climbed aboard the faster vessel, lungs tight, knowing the difference between life and death was measured only in wind. The crew rowed without pause, every man drenched in sweat, the flutes beating time like a heartbeat. For 2 days they raced, through waves that rose like walls and winds that clawed at their sails. The men sang between gasps, not songs of glory, but of home, of children waiting, of gods who might still listen. On the third morning, as the sun broke the horizon, they saw it, the first ship. Anchored in Mytilene's harbor, the soldiers already gathering on shore. The runner leapt into a small boat, paddling through the shallows with bleeding hands. "Wait," he shouted. "Orders from Athens." The executioners froze. A captain stepped forward, unrolling the new decree. Silence followed. Then one by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. The city was spared. For now, that night, as the Athenians rested, a storm swept in from the west. The runner stood beneath the rain, watching lightning crawl across the sky. The woman appeared again, hooded, soaked, her eyes glinting in the flashes. "You did what Pericles would have done," she said softly. He shook his head. "I only ran faster than a message," she smiled faintly. "And yet you've changed its meaning." Before he could speak, thunder drowned her words. When he looked again, she was gone, leaving only the echo of her voice and the whisper of the sea. He turned toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond the dark line of water, Sparta waited, patient, unbroken, watching Athens bleed itself dry. The runner felt it in his bones. The war was no longer about land or honor. It was about endurance and who would crumble first under the weight of their own pride. Lightning struck again, lighting the waves white. For an instant, he thought he saw shapes moving beyond the foam ships, hundreds of them, drifting silently toward the coast. Then the light vanished, and the sea swallowed the vision whole. He stood alone on the wet sand, heart racing, knowing the peace that had been won in mercy tonight might be the last Athens would ever know. Debates, shadows, and the edge of ambition, the storm that had spared Mytilene left Athens soaked but restless. Streets glistened, temples steamed in the sun, and the smell of rain mingled with decay from the plague's ghost. The city looked clean from afar, but inside, something dark had settled. The people had tasted mercy, then regret, then doubt. No speech could unite them now. Cleon returned from the sea to applause that felt hollow. He had lost the chance to make an example, and though Mytilene lived, so did his anger. In the assembly he thundered that softness had weakened Athens. Sparta watches us hesitate, he cried. Every pause is an invitation for betrayal. His words struck like hammers, shaping fear into resolve. The runner stood in the crowd, silent. He had brought mercy once. Now he saw how quickly it turned into a weapon. Each shout from the assembly echoed louder than the one before, until even those who disagreed fell quiet, afraid to be named cowards. That night, the city held its breath again. Ships returned from distant waters, carrying news of Sparta's next move, sieges in the north, whispers of alliances in the east. The war was spreading, widening, as though the gods themselves had grown tired of Greece's pride and decided to watch it consume itself. The runner found himself walking the long walls again. The stones were cold under his hand, wet from the sea's breath. He remembered the first letter, the one he had buried here, the choice he made that changed nothing and everything. Now, another messenger found him, this one young, desperate, his voice breaking. They're gathering in Sicily, the boy said. Athens plans to send a great fleet. They say Cleon supports it. They say it will end the war. The runner frowned. Sicily was far too far. End it, he repeated quietly, or forget it. The boy didn't understand, but he ran off, eager to deliver the next name on his list. The runner watched him disappear into the labyrinth of lamps and voices. The next morning the city buzzed with talk of the Sicilian expedition. Ambition had found a new The assembly was filled again, this time not with fear but with feverish expectation. At the center stood Alcibiades, young, brilliant, dangerous. His beauty was his armor, his charm his weapon. He spoke like a man born to bend fate. Sicily, he said, is not a distraction. It is destiny. We will strike not just Sparta's allies, but the world's imagination. We will make Athens the heart of the seas. The people roared. Even those who had wept for the dead now shouted for conquest. The promise was too grand to resist. New lands, new wealth, new glory to wash away the stench of plague and doubt. From the side, Nicias, the elder statesman, raised his voice in warning. We are not ready. Our wounds still bleed. War is not won by reaching farther than one can hold. Alcibiades smiled, slow and cold. Fear has never built an empire. The vote passed. Ships began to gather in Piraeus once more. Cleon, now diminished but not silent, watched it all unfold with narrowed eyes. The runner saw him on the steps of the council house, his hand clenched around a parchment. He thinks he's a god, Cleon muttered, watching Alcibiades surrounded by admirers. But gods fall faster than men. The runner hesitated. Will you oppose him? Cleon's answer was simple. No, I'll let him go. The days that followed were feverish. Craftsmen carved new triremes. Women embroidered sails with Athena's emblem. Priests blessed the harbor. The city's despair turned to noise, hopeful, foolish, unstoppable. On the eve of departure, the runner found Alcibiades alone by the sea. The young commander's face was calm, but his eyes darted to every shadow. Do you believe in omens? He asked suddenly. The runner shook his head. Only in choices. Alcibiades smiled. Then let me tell you one. Last night, someone defaced the statues of Hermes, every one of them. Faces shattered, noses broken. They say it's a sign the gods will abandon us. Do you believe that? I believe someone wants Athens to believe it. He turned toward the ships, their hulls lined in rows like sleeping beasts. Tomorrow they'll call it destiny. Later they'll call it madness. Either way they'll remember my name. The runner didn't answer. He watched as the moonlight painted the water silver and thought of all the names Athens had already buried. When morning came, the harbor was alive again. Trumpets, shouts, the smell of oil and salt. The fleet moved out, oars biting the sea in rhythm. Thousands of men, convinced they were sailing toward victory. The runner stayed behind. Someone had to carry word back and forth. Someone always did. but as he watched the ships vanish into the horizon, he felt the same dread he'd felt years ago, the same soundless warning that greatness often begins as ruin wearing a mask. Weeks passed, then months. News from Sicily came slowly, like echoes through fog. At first, victories small, bright, intoxicating, then silence, then whispers. The enemy was stronger than expected. Supplies were failing. Morale was cracking. Cleon seized the silence to regain power, feeding fear back into the city's bloodstream. "We stretch too far," he said to the assembly. "While we chase shadows, Sparta sharpens its blades." He was right. Reports came of Spartan soldiers in Attica again, and of a general named Brasidas cutting through the north like wildfire. One night the runner found a letter slipped beneath his door. The wax seal was familiar in owl, unblinking, with a single crimson line. Inside, only 6 words. "The fleet is lost. Trust no one." He ran through the city until he reached the council hall. No one believed him. They demanded proof, but the seas were empty, and the messengers gone. By the time the truth arrived weeks later, shattered survivors, ragged haunted, was too late. The Sicilian fleet had been destroyed, thousands dead, the dream of empire drowned in foreign water. Athens mourned in silence. For the first time, even Cleon's voice faltered. The city that had once defied Persia now feared itself more than Sparta. The runner walked the walls again that night. Rain returned, soft and endless. He looked out toward the dark horizon and thought he saw lights, tiny flickering, distant, ships. But these were not they moved slow and sure, like predators that had been waiting for the right moment to strike. He gripped the cold stone, feeling the storm rising again, the war not ending, only changing shape. Behind him, the city slept uneasily, unaware that its final chapter was already sailing toward it, quiet as a shadow on the tide. When brothers break, memory remains. The winter after Sicily felt endless. Athens no longer sang. Its temples stood in silence, its streets thinned by hunger. The marble that once glowed with pride now looked pale, as if the city itself had aged. Every returning ship carried fewer men than it had taken. Every victory story ended in a pause, then a whisper. Sparta had not attacked yet. It didn't need to. It waited, patient, like a wolf at the edge of firelight. Athens was devouring itself. Cleon ruled now not by respect, but by fear. He spoke of rebuilding strength, of vengeance, but his eyes betrayed unease. The allies had begun to drift away. Even the sea, once Athens' loyal servant, had turned uncertain. Ships disappeared, supply lines frayed. The city that once fed the Aegean now starved behind its walls. The runner had grown older. His hair carried streaks of gray, his gait slower, but his eyes remained watchful. He had seen the cost of pride too many times to believe in speeches anymore. When Cleon summoned him again, it was not for counsel, but for duty. "Sparta moves," Cleon said, voice sharp as iron. "They've taken up. I ride north tomorrow. You'll go with me." The runner hesitated. "And if we lose?" Cleon smiled faintly. "Then we finally stop pretending this war can be won." The march north was cold, brutal. Frost bit through sandals. Soldiers coughed into their cloaks. Yet there was something almost sacred about the silence that followed them. No cheering crowds, no songs, only the sound of armor brushing against bone and hope grinding down to dust. They reached Amphipolis by dawn. The city's walls loomed like teeth, smoke curling from behind them. Sparta's general, Brasidas, was already waiting. A man of quiet fury, he led not with speeches but with example. Where Cleon's men shouted commands, Brasidas' soldiers moved as one, wordless, precise, inevitable. When the battle began, it was swift. Athens charged, eager for redemption. But redemption is slow, and death is fast. Spears met shields, screams drowned orders. The runner saw Cleon ahead, shouting for formation, then turning to lay. A Spartan spear struck him through the chest. He fell without sound, his hand clawing at the air, as if reaching for the city he had failed to save. The runner dragged him aside, but Cleon's blood soaked through his tunic. "Tell them," Cleon gasped, voice fading. "Tell them we were right to fight." Then his head fell back, and the war claimed another name. Brasidas too was struck that day, and both generals died within moments of each other, 2 men who had become mirrors of their nations. Destroyed by the same fire they fed. By nightfall, Amphipolis belonged to Sparta. The runner escaped only because no one noticed him. In war, the forgotten live longer. He walked for days through frost and fog, back toward Athens. The world felt hollow. He carried no message now, only the weight of one question. What had it all been for? When he returned, the city barely recognized itself. The assembly spoke in whispers now. Food was rationed. Graves filled faster than hope. Even the statues of Athena looked weary, her eyes turned away from the sea. Then came the news. A truce. Sparta had offered peace. Athens, broken, agreed. It was called the Peace of Nicias, a name that tasted strange, like an apology said too late. For a brief moment, the city breathed again. Markets reopened. Children played by the walls. The runner watched them and wondered if they would grow up believing the war had truly ended. He doubted it. Peace, he knew, was only the pause between storms. Years passed. Alliances shifted again. The old scars reopened. Alcibiades' charming, reckless returned, promising once more that destiny belonged to those who dared. Athens followed him again, blinded by the memory of what it used to be. But fate, once tempted, does not forgive twice. News came that Alcibiades had defected to Sparta. The city erupted not in grief, but disbelief. It was unthinkable, and yet perfectly fitting. The same man who led them to glory had now armed their enemy. The runner sat by the harbor that evening, listening to the sea whisper against the stones. The waves sounded different now, heavier, slower, as though the ocean itself carried exhaustion. A woman's voice broke the silence behind him. "You still walk the walls," she said. It was Hertha, woman from years before, older but unbroken. Her eyes held the same calm fire. He turned to her. "And you still appear when the tide turns. History repeats," she said, "but never in the same way." They watched the horizon together. Far away, the faint glow of fires marked another battle. "Do you think we'll win?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "We already lost when we stopped listening to reason." He nodded. "Then why stay?" "Because someone must remember." A gust of wind carried the sound of distant drums. The runner closed his eyes. "I buried a message once," he said. "It warned of betrayal, of pride. I thought ignoring it would save us, but it only delayed what was always coming." She stepped closer. "You did what every man does when the world burns. You chose hope." He opened his mouth to speak, but a sudden cry echoed from the docks. He turned. "Ships, Spartan, ships approaching under the cover of night." The woman's hand tightened on his arm. "It's begun again." Torches flared along the shore. Bells rang through the sleeping city. Soldiers scrambled, shouting orders that no one could hear over the storm of panic. The runner felt the weight of time collapsing, every battle, every speech, every loss rushing back in one unbroken wave. The sky over Athens burned red, not from sunrise, but from fire. As he ran toward the walls, the air filled with ash. Somewhere above the din, a familiar voice seemed to echo Pericles. "Cleon, Alcibiades." It no longer mattered. They all said the same thing. In their own way, Athens must endure. He reached the top of the wall and looked out. The Spartan fleet was closing in, black sails swallowing the horizon. Behind him, the city roared in confusion. He thought of the first message, the seal, the hesitation. So much had begun with silence. Perhaps it would end the same way. The woman climbed beside him. "Whatever happens," she said, "remember this. No empire truly dies, it only changes form. Athens will not vanish. It will live in what it taught the world." He looked at her, the fires reflected in her eyes. "And Sparta," she smiled faintly. "Even victory can be a kind of ruin." Thunder rolled across the sea, and the first Spartan ship struck the harbor. The runner gripped the stone, feeling the tremor beneath his hands, the heartbeat of a city that refused to stop. Even as it bled, he took one last breath, tasting smoke and salt, and whispered to the wind, "When brothers become enemies, who will remember what they once fought for?" The answer came in silence, broken only by the sound of waves crashing against the dying shore.